Hi everyone. So I can't actually see who is in the meeting right now, or I'd say hi to you. But my discussion today is going to, or is about the process of inner alchemy in regard to astrology and how the planets operate as basically agents within a system of operation. You could almost think of it as though it's either a body, your personal body, or a computer program or anything like that. There are a lot of analogies we can use from the modern world that connect to these ideas just as well as they did thousands of years ago whenever these concepts were being brought about by the ancient occultists and hermeticists and philosophers. So magnum opus is the Latin phrase for the great work. And everything in esotericism is a reference to this, although I would say that most people might discuss it, but there's a lot of ambiguity surrounding this concept. And that ambiguity actually causes people to have too many insecurities about the idea and no sense of firm understanding or security in what it means to be doing the great work, what the great work is, or what that process looks like. And my primary goal in this is to give people a more firm or solid background for the notion of the great work in relation to not only astrology, but in their personal life, so that they can begin to live life in a certain way that they find to be fulfilling. So I'm going to begin with going through some slides, and there are about 11, and I'm going to kind of quickly go through these because I know that I have about an hour. So that way, if people want to ask any questions, I would love to be able to answer as many questions as possible before the end of our time together. So I'm going to begin now. As you can see, I entitled this Magnum Opus, The Great Work, Alchemy and Astrology. So the role of astrology, from my perspective, is the unification of consciousness and the end of suffering. So whenever I say the unification of consciousness, what I'm referring to is the individual consciousness, where there's a lot of discussion about, obviously, evolution of consciousness or evolutionary astrology, but the first and most essential aspect of that is the unification of consciousness, because without a unification within oneself, there can be no expansion or evolution taking place that we're actively participating in. And so I would say that generally people experience a great deal of suffering until there is that undergoing of unification within the psyche. So I view astrology's role as assisting people in unifying back all the parts of themselves that they feel are separate from them in some way, and helping them to understand that the reason that they're doing the things that they're doing in life are actually because of that to begin with. There are 4 alchemical stages in the ancient alchemical process, and those are Nigredo, Albedo, and Citrinitas, and Rubedo. Nigredo refers to the idea of the darkness of the soul, the nature of apparent evil, all the things within ourselves that we think are bad, negative, things that need to be destroyed or healed or fixed, the illusions and lies we carry around. And I associate the planet Saturn with this part of it, part of the process. So that would be Saturn, lead, guilt, shame, and the energy of like death or destruction. Albedo is the whitening process. It is the apparent good in us. It's that which we perceive within us that we call good. This is represented by the planet Jupiter. The metal of Jupiter is tin. And Jupiter represents life, can also represent pride in the sense of false humility, which I can discuss later, the energy of freedom, and the guru, or guru, within us all. Citrinitas is the yellowing. It's the initial stage of awakening to the self, in which there is this understanding that reality is perhaps not what we first thought it was when we were looking at it. So that's represented by the sun and the moon, which the sun is represented by gold and the moon silver. These are the two luminaries, just like we have two eyes, but there's still one light emanating from one source. Albedo is the merging of the apparent separate self with the true self. So it's the merger of the personality or the ego, represented by the moon, with the true self, which is the sun. It's a creation of one whole from two apparent opposites, male and female, akin to childbirth, this idea of a joining of two things and the production of something else. This also represents, from a, I guess you could say, a yogic perspective of the 7 chakras. And this is what I've come to see it as, in my perspective, and that's Saturn, first of all, being the root, our sense of safety or security in the world. Mars, the sacral, the pursuit of that which we think will give us pleasure. The sun is the solar plexus, our place of personal power, our soul, our, the sense of willpower we hold. Venus is the heart, that which gives us a sense of attainment or fulfillment. Mercury is the throat. It's the architectural or the archetypal structure of the universe as it's vibrating around us. So as we speak, these vibrations fill not only our bodies, but also the entire universe with specific sounds. The moon, being representative of the third eye, and also represents the personality and our inner vision of truth. Jupiter is the crown or the glory of reconciliation. Saturn and Mars, these are both planets that operate in a dynamic of need versus desire, and also a need for apparent security and a desire to prevent anything from separating us from that which gives us security, right? Because Mars holds the energy of separation, and Saturn is the energy of emptiness or fear. So Saturn represents the dynamic of fear and flight, whereas Mars represents the energy of anger and fight. So what's motivating those two things? It's one thing. It's a sense of security motivates anything that we're afraid of or anything that we're angry about. Venus and Jupiter represent the idea of desire and a sense of dominion over everything also, because that's a Jupiter aspect, is this idea of being the ruler of your life, because Jupiter is like the king of the gods. So it has like this sense of authority, being the authority figure of your own life and being in charge of everything and able to administer how the flow of your life goes. But there's a big difference in this, dynamic, in that it's essential for whoever is truly approaching these concepts to realize that connection and attachment are not the same thing. That whenever you are constantly, whenever anyone is constantly seeking after anything in life, there's an attachment to something. Whereas whenever one knows that there's an innate connection to everything, they're never seeking after anything. They're just simply realizing it as an aspect of themselves that they are seeing as though, and knowing that it's already an aspect of self. So there's no necessitated pursuit. It's more like an inner willful decision to experience the self. And then the 7 Hermetic principles, which totally connect to astrology in big ways. You have this idea of everything in the universe being mental or made from thought. That's the first principle. The second principle is vibration. Everything is moving, everything is in motion because everything is a frequency, and that's what everything in reality is, and its essential nature is sound. Polarity, everything has an apparent opposite, but even though it appears to be opposite, it's actually just degrees of the same stuff. over and over and over again. Cause and effect is the nature of if this, then that. Correspondence, if done here, affect experience there. Or if it's like that there, then it must also be like that here. And that's a principle that can be seen throughout the natural world and can be proven in the fact that basically everything is made of the same stuff. Rhythm is the idea of the pendulum swing, or the moon having this rhythmic effect on the tides of the ocean. Generation, or the principle of gender, is that everything in the universe is made of components which are male or female, and the male principle is the electric principle, the female principle is the magnetic principle, and the two charge the battery, which of course you could reverse those things if you wanted to and call the other male and female. It doesn't matter to me, but it's just the idea that there's two forces that seem to be complementary pairs that fit into each other for the sole purpose of generating some sort of experience or energy. And so those are my slides, and I went through them very quickly on purpose because I realized that there's a limited amount of time. So that's a lot all at once, and I'm happy to go back through it at different stages.
How about we go back to slide 1 and then see if there's any questions?
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's go back to this, and then I can get into even deeper realms of these concepts too, if that's what anyone's interested in. I don't even know how who's on here. Let's see. Okay, well, this is the first slide. The role of astrology being the unification of consciousness and the end of suffering.
Could you please clarify the unification of all parts of the self? What do you mean, unification?
Oh, okay. Well, what I'm referring to is the realization that no one is ever experiencing anything other than an aspect of themselves because nothing else is possible. This is true just because of the basic nature of the psyche. Everything that we experience is a projection from inside out, and it's not possible for there to be any other experience that we can have as subjective beings. It's just like there was a phrase that came to me one day in meditation, and it was really meaningful. And what that phrase was the center of the eye is called the pupil because the light is your teacher. And so it's this idea that everything that we're really experiencing is light. And so you can think of that symbolically or literally, because either way it's true. As light, is impacting the world around us, all we're doing is receiving the light, and our brain is interpreting it as a bunch of symbols and putting it back as a projection onto the world. So that's what I mean by the unification of consciousness, is ending that thought of separation from everything and realizing that you're one with everything, but not just in that way, but in many, many different ways. In quantum physics, for example, we know that there's a thing called quantum entanglement. So we're literally connected in a web of energy, and whatever I do affects everything in the entire universe. And the same is true for everything in the universe is affecting itself.
So is it possible to have an ununified consciousness?
Of course. Well, I mean, not really, but there can be the perception of it. An ununified consciousness is the perception of it being so. That's the only thing that ever separates us from this idea of wholeness or unity with the world, is believing that we are in some way separate from it. But it doesn't matter if you believe that or not, except in your personal experience, right? Because you experience it that way, so therefore it's true for you. But ultimately, the deeper reality of the situation is, no matter what you think or believe, the truth is that you're intrinsically, inherently one with everything around you in so many ways that we don't even know all the ways, and there's no escaping that. And truly, it's about taking personal responsibility for for your experiences, but also realizing that that's why karma is the way that it is, because every interaction we have with someone is an interaction with the self. The brain actually has no way of interpreting between personal self and other. Every time we make a statement or a judgment about someone, the brain takes that, bypasses the conscious mind into the so-called unconscious or subconscious mind, and it interprets any statement or judgment we make about anything else in the world as a statement of truth about the self. And I feel that if more people knew that, they would not be so quick to harshly judge people for anything in the world, simply because it's going to become a part of your identity. And so you can have like these ideas. People say, well, what about things that you need to address or deal with? Well, the answer is that you can still fight for the things that you love, because there's no discordance there, without saying that it's because of something that's bad. Why do you have to have a reason to do what you feel is the right thing? You don't. So just saying that something is evil is actually a justification for doing the thing that you believe is right, but why do you need a justification to do it anyway? Things like that.
Yes, I totally agree with that, and that is my expression, that is my experience. But why would someone have the experience or the perception of an inner world and an outer world? Is there a reason behind that? What is the purpose?
I don't know. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you wanted questions.
Oh, no, I'm just joking. But I
Okay.
mean, I don't know the answer. I can give you maybe a perspective on it. From my perspective, I think that if we perceive the external world a certain way, it's purposeful in that it allows us to engage with everything, but it's really a very beautiful and unique kind of experiment. It feels like, it seems like to me that we're like the self within the self, and it's like our personal universe, and we're deciding how we want to decorate it, what we want ourselves to be like and look like. And it's like we're doing this through interacting with the external world, and that's just how I view it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Any other questions from the audience? Please go ahead.
What would be the archetype, the astrological archetype that you would associate or correlate with the unification of the conscious mind?
Oh, I would say all of the planets are this process. They're all components of this process. I don't think that you would take any individual one and lift it up above any of the others, because in doing that, then you're separating it as something else, right? And you're saying this is, representative of it, but this is not. That's the key to that, actually, is realizing that there is no one archetype that could ever encompass this idea. It's simply something that can't be seen or known, just like they refer to the Tao, right? If it can be spoken of, then it's not the Tao. If it can be defined, it's not the Tao, because it's everything. And even that's an identification of it, but that doesn't really do it, because we don't know everything. So that's a meaningless definition, right? Does that make sense? Or did I address the question, or?
Sort of, but I guess I probably should have said, is there one, or is there a group of archetypes that could that could correlate with that?
As far as I'm aware, I don't think that there are any archetypes that symbolize the unification of consciousness itself in its completeness. In the stages, I would say it would be the planets, in that each planet plays a role in this process of the unification of consciousness. And whenever we begin to look at astrology from that lens, we can see that in each one of them. such as Saturn, not necessarily having to represent the idea of evil, but just representing all the things that we don't know, and representing the blank space of creation that exists to create some sort of delineation so that we can experience the bounty of creation represented by Jupiter. And Mercury being representative of the plan of the universe and all of the infrastructure of the universe and how it's, experienced as the universal logos, which is the rational plan of the universe. And the sun representing the individual soul, or the consciousness that exists, or the divine aspect of the soul, and then the moon representing the personality, and Venus and Mars representing our desire nature and the fulfillment and what that fulfillment looks like. So to answer your question, I would say that each of the planets represents an archetypal figure within this process of unification of consciousness. But even the 7 planets are not a perfect archetype when put together, because it would be impossible to create one from what I know.
So maybe the role could be to point out that everything is connected, and instead of this, linear. The conditioning has been the linear,
right.
know.
Well, I actually just had a moment, because I just realized that what I just said is kind of ridiculous, because honestly, everything in the universe is an archetype of itself. So you could say that anything is an archetype of this concept, because everything in existence is contained within everything else. So everything that exists contains everything that exists, because everything that exists is one thing. So to answer your question, there is one archetype, and it's you, it's me, and it's everything else in the entire universe.
So how about we go to the next slide, because we're kind of almost through halfway of the meeting.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, great.
Let's see. So I'll just move to the 4 stages. Okay, so would anyone like to discuss the idea of apparent evil?
How about give us your definition on it, and then maybe we'll have questions to bounce from there.
Okay, so in considering the nature of good and evil, it becomes, if anyone really delves into this, it becomes obvious that it's an issue of, relativity or subjectivity, in the fact that everything is just part of one process. And even though there may be things that we don't particularly like or enjoy, calling it evil really doesn't do justice to our desires, because it really just kind of gives us a motivation to not truly explore and understand something. We'll just say that it's evil, so we're defining it that way. It's kind of like the idea of the spider and the fly, right? So to the fly, it's really evil that the spider has built this web and that it's caught there and that it's about to be dinner. But to the spider, it's really good that, the spider decided to build the web and catch the fly. And so really it's a matter of your own perspective or judgment. And it doesn't really mean anything else about anything except for what you decide it is. Because there's really no other possibility. We can agree with each other, but that still doesn't actually define it beyond the idea of, I don't like that. And at the root of it is ignorance, or the aversion to understanding. Like there's a deep fear of us exploring things that we call evil because we're afraid that we'll relate to them in some way. And that's why Saturn represents this idea of guilt or shame and the death of our innocence, because we have decided that there's something wrong with us, because everything that we define as evil is reflected back to us as an aspect of ourselves in some way.
So if someone does not believe them, the darkness and the evil and the illusion, etc., are they liberated then or unified?
I think that everyone is always in a state of liberation. They just don't know it. I think that it's an ongoing process of liberation, because anyone who ever reaches any type of enlightened state, and I've spoken to quite a few people like this, and they say that everyone basically says the same thing, that people reach enlightenment only to realize, oh, it's just the same thing. I'm just having a different experience of awareness, but nothing changed really, except for my own perspective. And the world is still the same. I'm still the same. I just see myself differently, and I see the world differently. And I'm still in this process. I haven't escaped it, and there's no escape from it. Like the Buddha said in the first of the Four Noble Truths, to live is to suffer. And so the idea that we reach unification of consciousness, but then it's some sort of escape route, I would say, I'm not saying that you implied that, but I would say that many people do. And that's just simply not true. But if you reach these states of seeing through the illusions, have you reached unification? Only if you can look at the world and act from your personal truth authentically, and never seek to justify your actions, and never seek to get approval for what you're doing, and also never have any feelings of guilt, shame, or regret, then I would say that you have truly unified yourself with your within your consciousness.
I don't know if I agree with that, because if you do feel guilt or shame or any of these things, then you are judging yourself. And do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, so they are all part of the unification, don't you think?
Well, if you're judging yourself, then that means that you are saying that you're guilty of something, and that there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
A child doesn't know. Does a child feel that way?
Well, so
A
what? I
child
mean,
never
what
judges.
if you judge yourself that you've done something that in your estimation is wrong? And I don't see anything wrong with that.
Oh no! Like, well, if you decide that that you don't want to do something, right, then don't do it. Of course, I'm not saying that there's no feeling of personal differentiation between how you relate to your own experiences, as long as you know that it doesn't have to do with someone else or something else. It's you. That's all I mean there. So I agree with you in that.
Okay, great, great. How about we go to the next slide and let's give some other people the chance to ask some questions.
Okay, so this is about the idea of the apparent good, and Jupiter representing that, the idea of freedom, and the inner teacher, our inner wisdom, and also our sense of pride or false humility in thinking that being quote unquote good is some sort of attainment, whenever it's actually not. Because who judged it as good except for you, and that's not very meaningful unless you decide that it is, right? So it's about doing it from a place of just what you truly are experiencing within yourself as this nature of good, rather than seeking anyone to validate that for you. That's the implication. And this can also show us within the context of astrology where people might tend to do these things, right? So with Jupiter, you can look at someone's chart and say, where does this person feel really good about themselves? And Saturn would be, where does this person feel really bad about themselves? And how might that be impacting their lives? because either one can make us blind to really what we're experiencing.
I have a question, James.
Okay.
When you have with Jupiter, the guru, is this like your inner guru, or kind of reaching beyond that and making a connection with like a mentor in this aspect of the process?
I would say it's both, because as within, so without, right? So it's this idea that if there's a guru inside of you, guess what? There's also a guru outside of you. So if there's a teacher inside, then you're gonna encounter teachers outside of you, but it's the aspect of you that is the teacher. And that's the essential thing to remember, is that even if you encounter someone who becomes like your guru in your external life, that represents the internal part of you that is that. Because we can't say anything about anyone else, because it's not, really possible for us to do that, as far as I'm aware. So that's the way that I've come to see it, is anything that we experience in that way is that kind of projection. But it's within us. So you never actually need to go out and find a guru. You can go within and find that same guru. Anything that you can find externally, you can still find internally. People say things like, oh, what about sustenance, food and water? Well, there are yogis who live on air and prana for years and years and years. They've documented this in various studies and things. I was looking at this recently. There was a study that they did about, they went and researched, I think it was with Tibetan monks who were doing these supernatural things, and it's just like, we just don't know what all is possible, because there's a lack of inner exploration among humanity that exists, and not necessarily among spiritual types who are interested in these things, because hopefully meditation and discovering the self within is the primary experience. But
Yeah, right. And maybe meeting a mentor or guru, someone outside of you, reminds you of that apparent good, and helps you to inspire you, which is another Jupiter word, right?
Right, of course.
Serves as an inspiration for you to embody more of your spiritual
yes
essence, right?
Totally agree with you. I have several people like that in my life. Because, and that's exactly, that hits the nail on the head. It's like, where do I want to be investing? What parts of myself do I want to invest my energy into, right? And cultivating those areas of your life, and seeing those areas of yourself in others. And so if you're giving your time or money or attention to certain people in your life, then you're investing in that aspect of yourself that you see in them.
Right. Yeah, totally. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I didn't have as much to say about this aspect of it, because this is not necessarily as, I guess, I haven't explored this aspect as deeply as I did the others. But I do see this as realizing that the silver and gold that you see all around you is the silver and gold that exists within you, because the sun and the moon rule the eyes, and they also rule silver and gold. And so I think that's a pretty interesting way of interpreting that, and saying, oh, wow, all the things that I see around me that I think are so precious and valuable are actually just within me. And I'm able to see those things really well within myself if I were to take a look. Does anyone have any questions about this? Okay. I found this to be pretty interesting, as it's considered the last phase of the alchemical process. Let's see. So I'll just kind of go through the slides, and if anyone has any other questions, we can kind of touch on more things. Then I'm going to exit out of the slides so that I can just be present on the screen. However, I get back to that. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. So if did anyone have any other questions about the idea of alchemy in relation to consciousness, or what it is that we're transmuting? Because if there's any question about that, please let me know. Or if there's just anything generally that anyone would like to discuss in relation to that process, or how it might relate to astrology.
I have another question. I don't know if you've explored this or if anyone is aware of this, but have you looked at I know you had the classical planets aligned with the chakras. Have you looked into the outer planets as they may relate to the higher chakras, like Uranus for the 8th chakra and things like that?
I tend to personally stick with the traditional things that we have that are from antiquity, simply because there's more recorded information about it, and I have so much there that I find interesting that I haven't had any desire to search outside of that yet. Maybe other people are, but I know that in some of the mystery school traditions, people do attribute the outer planets to various places within the, like, for example, Kabbalah. Uranus represents the highest point of enlightenment or attainment of consciousness, and so I know that this is not something that is being excluded by everyone in the esoteric community. But to answer your question, I haven't really formulated any type of personal opinion or perspective on that, just simply because I haven't. But
okay, yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking.
Cool.
Thank you for participating.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm thankful if anyone wants to discuss anything or ask any questions. I don't believe that there's any right or wrong in this, just sharing a perspective, for sure.
I have a comment.
Oh, okay.
So it seems to me the unifying of consciousness is the goal of every single person on Earth, whether they realize it or not. And astrology is just one of the ways to get there. There's religion and there's a multitude of other things.
I would say, without making any type of absolute statement, because I don't know the answer to that question, but in my opinion, I would say, yeah, I think that the sole desire of the soul's desire is to experience that freedom to truly express itself, and astrology is one means in that process, and so is everything else that people are doing. They just think that they're really doing something else.
Right, because I think everyone just gets too tied into the objective world and don't understand it's really an inner process. And that's why they blame everything that goes on outside them, because they just can't see it's an inner projection. So
that's right. People are so caught up in all of that stuff. Thank you so much. That's so true.
Yeah.
I mean, you're obviously very aware of this, that people are, that's really what causes all of our so-called problems in the world is literally us not taking responsibility for the fact that it's us and not something else, because we're choosing to react a certain way.
Right.
even if you experience something that people consider truly terrible, it's still your choice in how you choose to define yourself based upon what you experienced and how you choose to react, rather than the idea that that thing should have some sort of power to control you.
Right, fate versus free will.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's always going to be fated until you decide to make it where it's not so. I experienced, over a decade of, what I once considered to be the most terrible stuff you can imagine. I was physically and verbally abused. And when I was 8, my father committed suicide. Whenever I was 4, my grandmother told me my mother wouldn't love me anymore because she was having her own baby, a new baby, and things like that. I mean, and I could look at all of that and be like, oh my God, life is awful, and I'm so upset. Or I could view that as it just means that I'm very amazing and powerful because I didn't allow that stuff to affect me, and I'm so strong. And realize that people were just reacting to situations in their lives, and it had nothing to do with me. And that's how you can become empowered, instead of, really, it's shifting from this idea of narcissism and thinking that everything is about you in a way that it's not, and realizing that other people are reacting to everything just like you are. And it's not about you, it's about their own inner stuff. And so then you shift out of that narcissism that we call, like, emotional response, and you realize that no, that's not a healthy, normal human emotional response you're having. It's an inherent narcissism that says, people are doing something because of me. No, they're not. You don't control other people, even if you think you do.
So, who wrote the magnum opus? When, where, and who? Was it a group of people, or was it passed down through the ages, or what? An oral tradition, or what? Thank you.
Okay. Magnum opus is it's a Latin phrase. It's not anything that was written as a work or anything. The great work is what this process is known as. It's actually, it describes the group of individuals who are actively working in the world to help everyone realize this about themselves, so that there can be an end to unnecessary suffering in the world. So those who are participating in the great work are actively engaging with this process, rather than being ignorant of it, or not know, that's just another way of saying not knowing. It's not meant to have a negative connotation. Or it's also a reference to people who are unaware also too, right? Who are undergoing the process of the great work. And then there's also the realization that not everyone is going to see this and come to terms with it in this lifetime. And that's okay and appropriate too, because it's just simply is what it is.
Yep, totally agree. And I also feel that it is a very natural process that, you don't have to do anything to attain it, but it's how we're naturally wired and who we are.
Exactly. There's nothing to earn. There's nothing to fix, right? It's just a simple acceptance.
Well, I think it's beautiful. I love it. So
Yeah.
any other questions from our audience? We have about 15 minutes left.
I have a question about the Nigredo process.
Okay.
Would you liken it to like a descent to hell, and then the next process would be coming back from that?
I think that you're very wise. Thank you so much for this good question. So yes, I would liken this to that same process as you have like in the story of the Christ, right? Which is a great archetype for this process, to whoever was asking about that. a great archetypal symbol is the story of the Christ, and this idea of coming to a state of unity, and then undergoing this process of doing all these miraculous works only to suffer and be crucified. And then, it says that he descended down into hell, and then it says he was resurrected. And that basically is very explanatory to what I discussed in the beginning about this idea of enlightenment, and how anyone who achieves or attains a sense of enlightenment realizes, oh, there's no difference except for how I see the world. It doesn't really change the world itself, except for how I'm approaching it. So yeah, what Vincent said was definitely true in that everything within you has to die first before it can be transmuted into that state of alchemical gold, but it's an ongoing process that never ends. There's always going to be more of the lead so that there can be the gold, and it's never going to be any different. There's never a point where it ends. And so I think that's a really essential key for people to pick up on in this, that it's an unending thing. There's an unending process and experience. To think that there's ever a point of final attainment is another illusion, and that's going to lead to another moment of like that Nigredo or ego death, right?
Got it. And I'm not wise. I'm only 24, so I'm not wise. Not yet.
Oh well, you're just as old as everyone else. Let's see. Does anyone else have any questions or comments, or would anyone else like to share anything? Because that's also a possibility.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I know he said something about like going into hell, but like even for me personally, like Libra, like even if you look at the scales, like I heard somebody say one time, it like looks like the sun is setting, and then it's like descending down into Scorpio, and like I don't necessarily see that as going to hell, but it's just like going just into like the dark spaces.
Yeah.
And even working with plants, like the Nigredo state is like you can take a plant, like let's say you make an extract of a plant. Like most people throw away the plant matter, but if you take the plant matter and you burn it down, it turns all black, and then you crush it and then it turns white. And then you continuously do that over and over again, like that cycle you were talking about. So just always I'm just opening it up for people to look at it as more than just going to hell, that's all.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And the whole idea of like hell itself comes from the Greek thought, for one thing, and also from other myths throughout history, in which there was this idea that whenever you die, you were ushered down into this holding place, and if you weren't good to the people in your life, they all like voted to send you into the fires of what was it? The really awful place where you were tortured until they decided that you had suffered enough so that you could be in the resting place with the rest of them, and then you could then you were waiting there until you were reincarnated.
Purgatory.
Purgatory is it's one word. I was thinking of the Greek Gehenna, or I think it is. Was it Gehenna or no? Ancient Greek. Sorry, I lost it. Tartarus. So they would say, "Oh no, you treated us badly. You're going to Tartarus to suffer for a while, and then if you suffer enough, then you can come back and see if we'll forgive you, and if so, then we'll let you in." And really, what that's also an allegory of is your own memories. And so we have to experience this idea of karma through our own memories affecting us until we come to a state of realizing that we're okay, that we're good, that we can forgive ourselves and move on, and that our memories can't torture us any longer. Because ultimately in the yogic text, that's what karma represents, is memory and the grooves that it makes up on consciousness as we interact with the universe in our lifetimes. So I'm agreeing with what Cameron was saying in that, like, there are many different ways that you can look at these processes, and I only touched upon some of them because I didn't know how much time I would have or how many questions there would be.
So
And I could never like touch them all.
where does
like what Cameron said.
astrology fit into this?
Well, astrology fits into this in the realization that we're constantly assisting people in taking responsibility for their own lives, becoming the captain of their own ship, as you might say, which is actually an old astrological analogy or allegory that was used in Hellenistic astrology. And also, it's a process of assisting people in ending their own suffering. That's the way I view it now. I don't tend to do a lot of predictive work for people anymore because I don't find that to necessarily be, I don't do it. Well, I don't want to, obviously, but unless I decide to, but it's more along the lines of, is that really addressing the situation if I predict the future for you, even if I'm good at it? And if, for me personally, if it's not, then that doesn't really resonate with me. If it's not truly addressing whatever it is that you're asking about, then I'm not really that interested in doing it for you. Other people might have other truths about it and decide they want to do prediction, but or things like that, and that's fine too. Sometimes I do prediction, but often it's only for people if I know that they're truly exploring their internal world.
Yeah, good answer. Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions.
I have another question, or just like observation, because I wasn't here for the whole talk, but I don't know if you talked about like sulfur and salt and mercury. Did you talk about that already?
No, I didn't get into like the deeper aspects of alchemy. I was just touching on the 4 stages that are really mentioned by, I believe, just mentioned by Jung, in the overarching concepts, because it was an hour, so there really isn't
Right.
exploring those things would take a long time, and honestly, I would be really curious to hear you speak about that sometime.
Oh yeah, maybe. Okay, cool. I'm inspired. All right, I'll do it. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? No one?
Okay. I could ask a question, but I admit
Okay.
I wasn't here for the whole presentation.
Okay. I was speaking about like the idea of unity consciousness, how astrology relates to that, and how we're experiencing ourselves in every interaction we have in life.
And I heard at the end there you were talking about how everything happens to us for a reason, or there was some sort of discussion around that. That's when I first came in, that there's no reason to be like upset about certain things because of that's happening, or how to frame them in a positive way. And I'm curious how you would apply like what we see. I'm in the United States and issues around racism. Like, how would you apply this to that narrative?
Well, and I do think that I addressed that conceptually, even though, like you said, you weren't here for that. The conceptual approach to that would be, even though I may not personally enjoy this experience, I know that it doesn't define me, and I can still take whatever action I want because I'm aligning with my inner truth and addressing whatever situation I encounter. Is that does that address the question there?
It kind of does, I think, conceptually, but literally, if I actually combat the system, I can actually end up in harm or dead. So, like, there actually is like a real harm that can come from it.
Well, right. I mean, I grew up as a gay man too, in the South, in Louisiana, which is not the same thing, and I'm not comparing the two. But the idea of confronting things as systems that work to systematically oppress people I think that really what it is for me personally is saying that right now in this moment, what am I experiencing? Am I experiencing this right now? And staying in the moment and not letting my past experiences to define me or any possible experiences define me, but stay in where I am right now. And that might be more difficult for some people than others. I don't know. But moment by moment, if I stay in that place of right now, what am I experiencing? Is this true for me right now, that I'm literally experiencing this and not just experiencing it in my mind? And then if we address things as they are happening to us, and not really happening to us, but happening within us moment by moment, we begin to see the world a little differently in that, personally, I have no idea what anyone else's life is like, and I would never pretend to. But I realized looking back that I spent a lot more time worrying about people judging me or oppressing me as a gay person living in Louisiana in the South than I did actually experiencing it, even though I know that a lot of people may experience that. Perhaps I was just very fortunate. But looking back, I realized that most of the time I wasn't experiencing those things literally in those moments, except in my mind I was. And those lingering feelings or thoughts caused me a lot more pain and suffering than any actual experiences ever did. But if someone tries to physically assault you, then hopefully it is your truth that you would defend yourself because you want to live and you want to continue enjoying life and seeing the beauty in life. And I don't feel like there's any kind of discord in the idea that we don't have to let the things in our life define us in order for us to continue to enjoy life and to assert ourselves into the world.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of your meeting, James. Thank you so much for a very interesting meeting. I'm sure we all got something out of it. I know that I did. So we look forward to seeing you again. And would you all please thank James, David, Wade?
Thanks, James.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks, James.
Great.
Thank you very much. Bye for now.